Hey, you guys, how's it going? My name is Sarah Lacco, and this is the Inspired Vida Show. I'm so excited about this, but why I'm so excited about it is I've always been fascinated about people's stories and their hardships. By the way, if it looks like I'm looking down and reading, it's because I am. And figuring out how they overcome their hardships and coming out on the other side. Since I've been a kid, I've always been interested about people's stories and have heard multiple stories multiple times, but you always get a little bit more each time. But people do go through some extremely difficult hardships, and somehow they rise above, turning their pain into their power. And in this show, we'll get to meet those people, pick their brains to learn from them and see how and why they overcame and their successes from that. So it's a pretty big deal, and I'm pretty stoked about it. But we have a friend here that I've known forever, since 7th grade. Whoop, whoop. His name is not Teresa, even though it might show up on the thing, but tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, I'm Matt Sebas. I've known Sarah for a while, and I have a construction company in Floyd, Virginia.
Floyd, Virginia. All right, so this is a little awkward at first just because brand new to this, but we are going to start. Matt has an amazing story. His story is insane and insanely cool. And so he's going to get to share that with us today. And Matt, I would love for you to tell us like how you were growing up. And how did you grow up? How was that for you?
Yeah, I grew up in like what would normally seem like traditional American lifestyle, grow up playing t-ball and had a very loving mother and had a father. And I also lived with my grandmother and my great aunt, which was maybe not so normal, but it was for me. It was my childhood. And I, I think really for me, it was really normal until I turned 6. And, up until that point, my family had Italian restaurants. So I'd grow up going to restaurants, seeing my family. My mom worked at them. So it was really fun and exciting. There was always something going on. And my mom was very present in my life. And I grew up in the suburbs in Connecticut, Stratford, Connecticut. And, from the outside looking in, seemed pretty good. And really, the types of things that I dealt with as a kid that kind of started to steer my life down into a different direction was my father was very emotionally abusive towards me. And I grew up really afraid of my father, and it turned into physical abuse as well. And so that happening in my younger childhood really kind of like set this block in my life where I kind of stopped remembering like what my actual young childhood was like. And at some point when I was around 6 years old, my mother decided that she needed to divorce my father, which the writing was on the wall. And she tried really hard to stay with my father, and because she wanted to keep the family together. And I commend her for that greatly, because she dealt with a lot, and she's an amazing woman. And so I do forget one thing. I have a young sister, well, younger. She's 2 years younger than me, so she's not young anymore. And yeah. And so, my parents divorced around that time, and it was a tough time, but I had my mom, I had my great aunt, I had my grandmother, and I had my sister. So it didn't really feel like much changed because my dad wasn't really there before. And I think I was more afraid to go with him because I didn't have my mother around for protection. And so I remember having a lot of deep fear at that point in my life. And, so I've told my story a few times before. I'm in AA, and that's a part of it. At different points in sobriety and recovery. And so one of the things that I try to do is keep it as honest as I possibly can without getting myself into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I think for me, it's important for me to recognize where I've come from. And that kind of helps me know where I'm going. And, it helps me remember and look back and see if there's anything that needs to be reevaluated. But when I was very young, I was, and so this is another piece of this. I heard a woman tell her story once when I was 21 years old, and she was an ex-prostitute. And it was the most gut-wrenching, honest story I've ever heard in my life. And that day, I realized what true honesty was and how freeing it is to be that, and just lay it all out there. And there's certain circumstances where it's not appropriate. And
Right.
then there's certain circumstances like this where I feel like it's kind of my duty, because in giving we receive. So anyway, um, at 6 years old, I was sexually abused for about a year of my life, and really didn't know what it was. I was scared and afraid. And I think the biggest thing I felt from that was, now looking back, is I was really ashamed and scared. And that kind of like really changed my life. At that point, I went from being somewhat of a normal kid to closing in and like hiding from
Yeah.
everybody and creating like a persona that was either cool, where nobody wanted to get too deep because I had these boundaries of like, this Matt's crazy and let's see what he does next, and things like that. And so that kind of like really dictated my life after that. And feelings are real, and they'd come up, and at that age it was really confusing because they're emotionally charged, they're humiliating, they're scary, they make me angry. And so I started to try and find outlets in my life to kind of deal with those emotions so that I didn't have to feel, and so when they would come up, then I would come out and go kind of crazy. And
Yeah.
so it started to lead my life down, a destructive path as a child, and was hard for me to connect with people. I still, on the outside, held it together fairly well. I
Mm-hmm.
made it through most school. I played sports still, which was a good outlet for me because I, did good at it. And I felt like, I was popular because I was decent at it and things like that. And that fulfilled kind of this void, and I still had my mother, and I still had my sister and my great aunt and my grandma who really tended to my needs. And they were super busy because I was living in a house full of women, and they were trying to do everything. And I was
Mm-hmm.
feeling like I needed to be the man of the house and like take the trash out and like change light bulbs and stuff, and, do my part. And, so I felt like they did an amazing job at making me feel at home, at peace. I remember having night terrors as a child and running into my grandma's bed and sleeping with her, and her holding me, and then she'd wake up in the middle of the night and start screaming from her night terror, and I'd start screaming, and it was just still a thing. But it's like, in retrospect, I was really in the best place I can possibly be, but the help that I needed surpassed what they were able to offer, and
Right.
at no fault of theirs.
Totally.
And so not so much of a normal childhood, but that was my kind of childhood. And just really, I think, going into 10 years old, I started to kind of lean heavily towards the outcast kids,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like if I was a part of them, then nobody can really see me. They just saw this persona of like, let's just not dig too deep with this guy. And,
It
you
created
know,
that boundary.
yeah, I was creating unhealthy boundaries at that point
Mm-hmm.
in my life. And so, I'd say 10 years old was, and I confirmed this the other day. I called one of my cousins and was like, how old was I? And, I started to kind of drink a little bit. And, it was very harmless at that point. It was like growing up in restaurants, going to bars with my dad. It was a very normal thing in my life. It was like kind of like bread with butter, it just kind of
Mm-hmm.
went well together. And I just thought it was very normal. And so my cousins and I would be at family parties and things like that. And we would, grab extra alcohol, things like that, and drink. And slowly kind of developed into this obsession of like, I needed more. And,
How
you
old were
know,
you when that developed, or when
I
you
would
noticed it?
say I was probably 12 to 14 when I was an alcoholic, I would say, but I was definitely self-medicating at
Mm-hmm.
that point. And like I didn't have to drink every morning when I woke up, but like it's all I really thought about until the weekend. And then during the weekend, it was all I really thought about, finding it and things like that. And it really consumed my life. And in retrospect, looking back on it, I realized it was a real easy way for me to just kind of drown out the past because, when I was abused as a kid, it went to court and I had to testify on the stand. And to be completely honest, I've done a lot of work around that abuse in my life because I realized it dictated a lot of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was, going to counseling and things like that. I just realized that going to court, how much that shamed me of having to testify in the stand and talk about what happened in front of all
Yeah.
these people. And it was hard for me, like in my younger years and even in my late teens and early 20s, to really connect the dots until I was in a sexually abused survivor group. And they asked if, the person had been prosecuted. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, how'd it go? And I had to testify. And they've changed things since then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really humiliating experience, And so that humility and that being ashamed at that age and trying to hide so many things, my parents divorced, my dad not really being a part of my life, the sexual abuse, it was just, it was a full deck of cards, and I
Mm-hmm.
did not have the tools to deal with it. And I went to, like I said, I went to a lot of counseling, and in the counseling moment, it felt like it helped a little bit, but a lot of it was court mandated. And I don't know if I had the best counselors that, I could have
Right.
had at that point. Um, and I didn't learn till later on in life, like the type of help I needed actually, and I think that's the beauty of life nowadays is there's so many tools out there that you can grab, like, especially through something
Yeah.
like this, you have access to kind of anything you want if you
Right.
actually want it. Um, and so, in that 12 to 14, is when I started to kind of dabble in drugs because alcohol just wasn't enough. And that was kind of my mentality back then. Anytime my mom would confront me, anytime my grandma or my great aunt, I'd want to get more high, or more messed up because I didn't want to deal with the questions and the pressure. And I was kind of acting out when all I really needed was like the path to help, but I just couldn't see it at that age in my life. I was
Yeah.
consumed with partying and the next thing, and it just kind of kept elevating. And then when I was 15, partying just kept going, more alcohol, more drugs, all different kinds. And, ended up somehow getting my driver's license. And when that happened, it really took off. And then freshman year was my last year in school. I just couldn't focus anymore. I couldn't focus on, what I was supposed to be doing in school. I was too caught up with what I wanted to do outside of school. I was getting more angry, and I didn't like that, because I didn't have any way to deal with any of my emotional stuff. And at that point in my life, my mother and now stepfather, which I kind of forgot that part, my mom remarried when I was 9 years old, and married an absolute saint. He's a good guy. We had our moments. He was tough, and really didn't put up with my crap, and scared me in a whole different way where, he was just trying to bring me back down to a level playing field, but I was already too far gone. And so, when I was 16, drugs started progressing. At that point, I was out of school. And so I was admitted into my first drug rehabilitation.
Did you go willingly, or was that something
I did not really go willingly. My mother found me one night totally out of it. I was on all different drugs and alcohol, and called for an emergency counseling session with a counselor I'd kind of gone in and out of seeing. And I went into counseling, and I remember attacking my dad in there because he came for what reason, I don't know. And that's one of the things when I was molested as a kid. I think one of the hardest things for me was I expected my father to be there for me. This guy who was tough and emotionally abused me and physically abused me at times, I thought he would come like a knight in shining armor, like this tough guy is how I visioned him, and protect me against this situation. And I remember standing on the porch, and I was like 6 years old, and I was waiting for him. And my mom's like, "What are you waiting for?" And I was like, "I'm waiting for dad, he's going to come," and he never came. And I think that was a really big piece of my life, of my detachment from my father. I think that moment sticks with me still now, because when I talk about it, it makes me feel emotional, and it's also helped me develop myself into the father I don't want to be.
Yeah.
And so I went into the counseling, and the counselor was like, I lost it in there, and I got admitted into a psychiatric ward and spent some time there. I don't know how long I was there for. I don't know if I was there for a month or 2 or 3. I can't remember. It was a very kind of cloudy point in my life. And so made it through that. And the doctors were, I didn't really get any help because they were medicating me with drugs, which basically, antidepressants, psychotics, all sorts of things like that, which I'm not against. I think they serve a purpose for people. And I think for me, they served a purpose at a point in my life, and I've moved on from it. And that's a complete personal preference. Everybody needs different things. And so I got.
But you didn't get a lot of counseling in there, or?
I did, but it was so clouded out. I honestly felt like at points I was so drugged up that I don't even really remember. I remember going to group therapy in there. I remember them, the tough thing about me is that all my crap that happened to me as a child is like documented in like all my doctor logs. So as soon as I go anywhere, they're like, "Matt's been molested. Let's talk about that." And like, there's other people in there that it's happened to, that they're like kind of digging. And it was kind of this thing where like, we all know it happened, and I know it did, and I'm done with it. I've admitted it. It's all good now. And so it was this weird thing that I think if they would have had to try and pull it out of me and the emotions came, I might be able to deal with it in a different way of just being like, you've been molested. Let's talk about it.
Right. And actually get to like work through it.
Yeah. And so I think that did me a disservice. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I think everything that happened to me like got me to the point I'm at. So I don't really regret any of it.
Right.
Maybe one or two things I'm like, ugh, but it's behind me now.
Yeah.
I made a lot of amends. So I got taken out of there and they didn't think it was a good idea for me to go back into population, is what they said. And I went into drug rehabilitation, and it was Northern Connecticut. And to be honest, there's a lot of different drug rehabilitation places out there. I've been to a few of them and I've seen different types. And this one was more of the resorty type, beautiful setting in the woods, yoga sessions and meditation sessions. And I think that serves a place in my life in the future. At that point in my life, being 17, I was like, what the heck is going on here? This does not help me. Like, I'm hardcore. Like, I need to fight and like break things and scream and like be with like the lower population or something. And
and especially if that's never something you were like exposed to previously, you're like, what is happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, and now where I live, it's like all healing, and I'm like, this is awesome. It works.
I like it now.
Yeah. But back then, I was like, man, this is weird. This is a cult, But I was also 17 and really dumb,
right.
And so I did make it through that, and I think like my brain works very well. It works fast. I can think through things. That's why I think I'm good at the business I'm in, because I can think quickly and keep moving. But I think I basically thought my way through that. I knew what I had to say, and I left with like the shining star on my forehead, and they were like, "Star Child," and I was like, "Yeah." And so like I was on a little bit of a high, and I think in the beginning of recovery they call it the pink cloud, and so I got out of the rehab and I went and got a really funny job. I had to get a job. It was like, this is just a funny side note. So when I got there, like, you have to get a job right away, because I was living in a boarding house with like other people trying to get sober. And so I was like, all right, I'll find a job. And so I was in the newspaper, because they didn't have cell phones then. I think I might have had a beeper. So that's like hilarious to think about. I sound like my dad now, or my stepdad, like, back when I was your age, we didn't have toaster ovens. And I'm like, what? But, so I looked at the job, and there was a job at a marina, because I was living in Mystic, Connecticut. And at the marina, it was like lavatory cleanup and like, sweeping the boat docks and stuff like that, janitor. And I was like, sweet, dude, at a marina with like hot chicks on sailboats. I was like, I'm in. And so like, I remember skateboarding over to this marina, and I got there. There was this like long line of very rough looking people. And I was like, is this the line for work? And they're like, yeah, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm applying for the job, man. And they're like, okay. And like, I stood in this line for a while. I was like, holy shit, man. Like, a lot of people want this job. I'm like, this is like gotta be a good job. I hadn't really like worked a job like that. I worked for my family. I worked, stuff like that in the past. And so I got in line and I went into the office, and the guy's like, so how old are you? And I was like, 17. Or like, is your mom going to sign a consent form? I was like, yeah. I was like, of course I wouldn't be here if he wasn't. And like, I remember just being like such a punk at that point. And he's like, how many years have you been at sea? I was like, none. And he's like, how many times you've been in a sinking vessel in a storm? I was like, what? I was like, dude, I'm here to like clean toilets and shit. He was like started laughing, and he was like, you're in a line for like a deep sea emergency repair ship job. And I was like, And I was like, well, I will say that I'm super hardcore and I'll do anything you tell me, and I'm desperate. And they hired me. And I was like,
Really?
I was like, all right. And I was so scared because I was with all these literal like modern day pirates. And, at first I looked at them all and I'm like, okay, all right. They all do drugs. This is going to be great.
Oh my gosh.
And so I started doing deep sea emergency repair on ships and building yachts when we weren't doing that in a boatyard.
Whoa.
And I did really good. I was there for like 6 months. And, at this point in my life, like I had a clean record, like I could do things. And I'll get into this a little bit later on in the story. But, so I had a lot of opportunities, and they had another shipyard in South Africa, which they were like, you can go there for 18 months. We pay for room and board. And I was like, dude, I could travel the world, meet lots of hot South African chicks and stuff like that. Cause I was like pretty young, and like, that's
Yeah.
what I think most young guys think about, whether it's men or women, it's whatever. But, so I did that job, and unfortunately it was a double-edged sword. It was awesome. I made really good money. I did really crazy stuff doing at that job, like going out to sea and working on ships, not even knowing what I was doing at all, but just really handing tools and stuff at that point. But the problem is we would pull 40, 50-hour shifts nonstop without break. And the only way that all these people made it through that was doing drugs.
Oh my gosh.
And so, for a couple months, I was pretty deep into my sobriety, and I had this mask on where I'm sober, Matt, and I'm doing this because I'm going to show all you people you're wrong and I can do it. And eventually one night, after a lot of working, I ended up doing drugs again, and I remember literally knowing, I felt the feeling. I was like, I'm off to the races. And I went in and told my bosses the next morning, I said, I just need you to know that I relapsed. And they're like, whatever. And I was like, no, I'm off to the races. I can't work for you anymore, and be safe and be responsible. And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah.
Wow.
And it's interesting because they had my mom's number because she was my contact, and they called my mom for years afterwards to check in on me.
Wow,
And
that's
you
so
know
cool.
that. So there are some good people out there, even
Yeah, for
crazy
sure.
pirates and shipyards. Um, so, I remember going back to my halfway house and basically being so ashamed. And that's that ashamed feeling that started creeping back in again. And then it just like triggers everything. And it's like, whoa. And then I'm like back to 6 years old again and afraid. And, and then I can't be in that place for too long because it's super uncomfortable. And so I packed up everything in the car and like snuck out the window, like super covert ops mission, which really wasn't even necessary. But that's like how my brain works when I'm in Badland.
Right.
And I drove back to my hometown, Stratford, Connecticut, and moved into a pretty bad situation, like drug infested home. And the hardest thing for me at that point was the day I got back to Stratford. I remember driving down the road, and where I live now in the country, everybody you pass, pretty much, because it's a small town. So you drive and you do like this with one finger to wave. But where I grew up, it's not like that. You don't really, there's so many people, you don't really bump into people that often, or drive past and be like, oh, there's blah, blah, blah. So I remember driving and seeing my mom's car, and I passed her and she knew it was me. And I remember seeing her face just sink because she knew I wouldn't come home without telling her, and that something bad must have happened. And that's when all those feelings started coming up again. I need to get high. I need to do something because I can't deal with that crap. I can't deal with thinking about my mom sad or any of that stuff. And so that point was seriously nosedived again, and got into more drugs and more partying, and didn't want to be in my hometown because there's just too many things where I remembered stuff. I remember getting drunk one night and sitting on the porch of the person that molested me with a baseball bat because I was going to kill him. And I don't really think I would have. I probably would have ran away crying. I don't even know what would have happened, but
Right.
I was filled with rage, and that whole place was just too triggering for me. And so, you know, I started going to music shows and things like that. And it was an alternate universe. It was like people selling drugs and crafts and food and parking lots, and everybody considered themselves a family and stuff like that. And, you know, so I was like, good, I'm in need of a family because mine's too good for me. Really, I don't know what I would have said back then. I probably would have been like, they hate me and I'm a jerk and whatever, and can't expose them to my insanity. But so I felt good, like I had a family again, you know, and started traveling with them. And, you know, it was just one party to the next, nonstop, 7
And
days
how
a
old
week.
were you then?
I was 18 to 19 and pretty lost, driving with no insurance or anything like that, and selling potatoes and just anything I get my hands on to make a buck to get to the next show. And so went to a show one night, and it was a very tragic night, and still
Where were
is.
you?
I was in Virginia. I was in Salem, Virginia. And we went to a hotel, and kind of like the family, you know, vibe was everything's everybody's to a degree. So we all slept together, like just in the same room, and shared beds and things like that, partied together. And, you know, it was like all of us had similar pasts, you know, and so we were all running and hiding from something. And so it was a very toxic scene because it was like the kind of competition that goes on of like who can bury their stuff the deepest, you know, and that translates into who's going to party the hardest, which is dangerous when you're partying with drugs
For
and
sure.
things. And we were in the hotel and partied hard. And one of my friends that was with me there that night, he was sitting in the back of my truck, and he was cutting off his dreadlocks one by one. And he's like, tonight's the last night I'm going to use and drink and all that. I'm going to go home, be a musician. And he was passing them out to everybody. And I was like, that's a great idea. Because, you know, as crazy as I was, I still had compassion. I still knew mostly right from wrong. And I had a lot of empathy for people in tough situations, even though I was in one too. And I would always sit and listen and talk and try to meet people at whatever level we were both able to meet at. And that night we all went to bed and we woke up in the morning and everyone was panicking. And my friend from the night, and I'm not really going to say any names right now, but
Yeah.
was laying in front of the door and wouldn't wake up. And his girlfriend was there laying in front of the door and wouldn't wake up. And everyone was panicking, and I didn't know what to do. And we didn't have a cell phone or anything like that. And so I ran to the front desk, and they said, there's a medical place right down the road. And I picked them up and put them in my truck and drove them there. And I remember getting out of my truck and trying to drag them into the hospital. And doctors came out and they were dead. And, you know, because I was with them and they asked me what they took, I said, the only thing that we did together was morphine. I got charged with their murders. And talk about like devastating blow. I like, you know, mostly in my life, everything has just been little dings that kind of deflected off of me.
Right.
And I never really had to stop for very long to look at my actions and how they've affected me, everyone in the world, my life, you know. And at that moment, I remember on my hands and knees looking down and just saw like my mom's face if I would have died, everybody that I had hurt, my life ending, And I swear the next thing I knew, I was being handcuffed and put into a police car, and I didn't know
Wow.
why. And I was still completely messed up from the night before. And, I gave a statement about how we partied, and they used that against me to say that I gave them drugs that killed them.
Whoa.
And, and then I got sentenced to murder and distribution of drugs and put into a holding cell in a paper suit, and detoxed in there. And talk about humiliating, just fully on like bars with everyone watching you. And that was like hands down the lowest point in my life. Like, just basically wanted to find the fastest way to commit suicide at that point. Like, I just was like, I can't even, like, I can't call my mom. I don't even want to like call anyone I know. I don't want anybody to know that I'm still on the planet Earth, and super afraid and just completely out of it. And so I remember getting out of the detox, and after that they spray you with a hose and scrub you with a brush and soap to like clean you before you go into population. And I got put into maximum security, and I'm a smaller northern Yankee guy in a small southern town in maximum security. And as soon as I walked in, I got mugged and jumped. They closed the door, and I was very surprised to make it out alive. It was the first time in my life I felt like I had to fight for my life. And, when you're locked up, you can close the door and lock yourself in there, at any point during the day, and lock yourself in your cell. And I used to do that every day because I was afraid, to go out. And I remember sitting in there completely hopeless, still basically like, I just need to find a way to end it. Still didn't want to talk to my family. And I remember, and I'm not a religious person at all. And I'm not against religion either. Really not for or against much. There are certain things I definitely don't like, but I found a little Bible in the window, and I honestly just started reading it because I didn't know what else to do. And it kind of like distracted me. There's, when you read the Bible as just a book and a story, it's just a bunch of stories with like hard to understand language, like it's just, so it was a big enough distraction, and there was some hopeful stories in there that kind of changed my mood a little bit. And one thing that happened to me that was like probably the biggest changing point in my entire life was when I was considered a health threat to the population because I had like really nasty hair, and I had been living on the road and was really dirty. And I had to go down and get my hair cut. And this, I had not really spent much time in the deep South at this point in my life. So I wasn't really accustomed to Southern belles and like old gnarly like Southern farmer ladies and stuff that like don't give two shits because they're hardcore. And this old lady walks out, and I have a bad attitude because I just left. I had no more hope in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh God, like this old lady's gonna cut my hair. And she's like, what'll it be? And I'm like, she's like, well, actually it doesn't matter because you don't have a choice. You're getting buzzed. And she went to buzzing my hair, and I remember being very upset. And she started cutting my hair, and her hair trimmers got stuck in my hair. And I was chained and shackled to the barber's chair. And they wouldn't let her go back to her car to get a pair of scissors to cut it out of my hair because I was considered very dangerous. And so one of the people at the jail had to drive to the store to get another pair of trimmers. And it was only like, I don't know, 20 minutes away, but it felt like 20 years because she sat across from me and just stared me directly in the eyes, shaking her head, like looking at me. And I just started crying because I felt so seen. Like I had never been so like hair trimmer stuck in my hair, this little old lady standing in front of me, just shaking her head at me. And she got the hair trimmers and she's like, "You need a lot of help, son." And I said, "Yeah, you're probably right, but it's too late for that." And I went back to my cell. And the next day, this woman named Kathy, her name was Jerry Lawrence. She's a saint. There's this woman, Kathy Wright, who's a librarian. And I never used to go get library books because I didn't want to like be around anybody. And Kathy Wright was like 4'11", which my mom and my sister are 4'11". So there was this like nurturing vibe there. Like, this woman is my mother.
Familiarity.
And yeah, big familiarity there. And I walked to the balcony of the cell block, and she looked up at me and she said, "Come on down." And that woman, Jerry Lawrence, had given her a book to give to me. And it was called Living Sober. And I got the book, and inside the cover was one stamp, which when you're locked up in prison, stamps are considered currency. So it's kind of a bigger deal. And there was an address. And so I got the book and I read a few pages, and there was just something really serendipitous about that moment. It was like a powerful moment. It's like you have those moments in life where you're like, whoa, like that, I got to pay attention to. Something's there. And even though I was pretty far off, I'd been sober now for, a week or two, and like electrons and neutrons in my brain were starting to connect again. And I felt something, and I went up and I wrote a letter to the guy in the book. His name was Nelson McCormick. And I had decided at that point, I had talked to my mom, and she was devastated. But I want to get back to I wrote a letter to the guy, and the whole time I was in there, I never got visits because I was from out of state. I didn't know anybody. And when the visitation was going on, everybody would get ready and comb their hair. And that was like the only time where I can kind of just do whatever I wanted to do, and it didn't matter, because everyone was preoccupied with their visits. So I wrote this guy a letter just saying, "I don't really know who you are or why I'm writing you, but I'm afraid." And that's all I wrote. And that couple days after I sent that letter out, I was visitation. I was sitting down there watching Andy Griffith because that was the only show that we were allowed to watch. And they called me for a visit. And I was like, "What?" And I remember running up and getting my jumpsuit on, because you had to wear your jumpsuit, and never leaving the cell block really before, and being excited. And I remember getting on the elevator and going down and getting into the visitation area where it's all these booths. And I'm like walking down the booths to my number. And in my head, I'm like, is it my mom? Is it this beautiful woman that's like going to come save me? Or like, what is going on? And I remember getting to my booth, and there was this like 80-year-old man sitting there with these humongous blue boxers on, with his hair perfectly combed, with a cane and all these gold rings on. And I picked up the phone and I was like, "Hello?" And he's like, "I'm Nelson McCormick, and I believe in you." And I was like, man, like I never heard anyone in my life say something like that to me. And just the authenticity and like the connection. And like from that moment, I felt like I kind of like grew like an inch, and like felt something different. And we just talked. He didn't badger me. He didn't try and say, "You've been molested, you've been this, you have murder charges, you're in a lot of trouble." He was just like, "How's your day? What'd you do today?" Did you eat breakfast? Did you eat lunch? Do you need a pair of underwear? Because I'll like put $10 on your books to buy a pair. And it was, so he came every week after that for an entire year.
No
And
way. Wow.
yeah, and it just filled me with like hope that the world is much greater than just what goes on in here.
Mm.
And there's a lot of valuable like things that we probably miss on a daily basis. Like if I ever saw this guy walking down the road, I would never even think twice about saying hi. I would just walk past him. Or if I bumped into him, I'd probably be like, geez, old man, like, what the heck?
Mhm.
But it's something about finding yourself in those situations where everything's gone, it's full humility, and you just open yourself up and those things happen, and that's like one of the things like I take into my life nowadays is like I try really hard to not judge books by its cover. And in our current climate with politics and COVID and all those things, it's super easy to watch the news and create a pretty serious judgment about all the people around us. And some of the people that I disagree with the most, I get some of the most valuable lessons in my life. So, with him coming to visit me, talking to my mom, I ended up going to court, and I remember getting ready to go to court, and there's this really hardcore intensive like therapeutic community that helps people that have done longer term prison sentences like readjust to society, get off drugs and alcohol. Is called Hyjera House, which is a Viking word that means a journey from a dangerous place. And so I'd heard about that, and I knew I needed something like that in my life. I know that I needed some kind of boot campish style, like in my face, like you need to like look at yourself in a different way than you ever have. And so I tried to apply for that through my lawyer in prison and those things. And so what I did was I wrote the letter to them, and they said, you can't come here because you're considered a violent offender. And I was devastated because I was like, even if I have to go to prison for 20 years, I still need to get out and like learn how to live life, because then I'm going to be institutionalized. And I wrote a letter back to the senior person of that program and asked him, I said, look, I don't consider myself violent. I literally just tried to help people. And because I was in the wrong spot at the wrong time, I am where I am now. But I own that. And if I do good, can I come to your program one day? And I was supposed to go to court one day, and they never came and got me. And he wrote a letter and petitioned and got me to be able to go to Hyjera House. And so long story short, I was able to serve just over a year. They lessened my charges tremendously, which I'm now working on getting expunged. And I was able to go to that treatment and only had to serve a year and 1 day exactly. And
because you got into that program?
Yes, because I got into that program because of.
And how long would you have had to stay in prison had you not had their help?
32 years.
Whoa.
Yeah. I'd still be there.
Damn.
Yeah. And it was like, it's like this thing when you start to make a transition in your life, whether it's working out, whether it's a yoga practice, a meditation practice, starting counseling, biking, anything like that. It's like the first steps into things like that are really challenging. And it's like, oh God, this doesn't feel right. And I don't know what's going on. And then you kind of start getting traction and you're like, okay, all right, like I think I might have this. And it's like a slippery slope, and like when I met Mac and he started pointing, he's like, talk to this guy, Jim Swan. He comes to prison and he talks to all the inmates and he helps them get sober. So I'm like, why the hell do I need to talk to somebody about getting sober in prison? And he's like, why the hell do you not have, you don't have anything else to do? I'm like, oh, good point.
Right.
And so I went to Jim Swan, saint too, helped me understand how I was taking my behaviors just because I wasn't using them for using drugs and all this stuff. I was using them in other ways. And it's so easy, like even in sobriety now, and this isn't like an AA talk. Sorry, I keep going to that place, but it's a big part of my story.
Yeah.
Being sober. It's like even today, not today, but in my life currently, I find myself becoming a workaholic really easily because I'm like transferring addictions. And that's why like this shit takes a lot of time and effort for my whole life to kind of stay on a pretty straight and narrow path, which ends with me being pretty happy, having good relationships, being able to raise my daughter. So I got into that program and it was a full on boot camp recovery. And, the first thing the director says to me was like, you better not fuck up because if you do, you're back in prison for 32 years. And I was like, I'll do anything. And he's like, you will. And I cleaned dumpsters with toothbrushes. I, did whatever it took. And it was probably the most intense thing I've ever done. I remember when you're there for 5 months, they'll let you go out for an hour and you have to literally write your itinerary for the whole hour. Like, I'm leaving at 8:01. I will arrive to this place at 8:05. I will depart this place at 8:06. And so they check on you to make sure that you're on time. So, again, a lot of times people's family comes, picks them up and stuff like that. But I was alone in Virginia. So there was an old bike in the basement with like flat tires and stuff. So I remember like filling up the tires and I'm like, all right, I'm out for an hour, freedom. And I remember driving and my counselor from the program drove past me, was like watching. And I remember like seeing him be like, oh, and like flipped over the handlebars on the bike and crashed. I was so scared. I swear, like the shit pile of my life got so big that I felt paralyzed in fear to mess up again. And
oh, wow.
yeah, I think, it's so I ended up graduating that program. And at that point in my life, I was pretty heavily involved in AA. But I was also very involved with like trying to find similarly minded people, not necessarily sober, but people that were just genuine and honest and were into just being happy, like finding peace in their life and not letting the old baggage kind of dictate how they acted, in this world. And so I ended up, this point in my life, I was living in Roanoke, Virginia. And I remember seeing a flyer up at a Natural Foods Co-op for a free pancake breakfast. And I was like, sweet, I'll go to that. And I went up there and it was like a hippie commune that does, which I don't know if they'd consider themselves hippies, but I did. I was like, what? And they do dream work, so they like record their dreams and they do dream work. And I was like, I'm willing to try anything once, except like drugs and alcohol again. But,
right.
So I remember doing some of these dream groups and it was definitely weird, but I kind of like committed to like, I'm doing this for like 6 weeks. And at the end of the 6 weeks, like I had the tightest bond with 2 people in there that became like kind of elders to me that like helped me take another step in my growth process. They really helped me come to terms with like my sexual abuse, helped me get into sexually abused survivor group, which helped me deal with the anger around it, which I didn't even know I had. They really helped me deal with the shame like part, like the shame part of it, which constantly led into new things, and so I decided at that point I wanted to move up to the Floyd area. and rooted here. And now I've been here for pushing 19 years. And
Whoa.
it's a long time.
Yeah, I didn't realize it was that long. Wow.
Yeah, I'm getting old. I do have some white hairs.
What? Just kidding.
Yeah. So, I moved up here and immersed myself into the community. And it was totally different than anything I've ever experienced, because I kind of grew up like skater, punk, ghetto, preppy, like Stratford kid. I don't even know how else to describe it.
Well, and there's so many things to be like exposed to there.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, like the way I say is a lot of earth people here. There are people that are like remove themselves from the craziness of society and have gotten a little bit like closer to the earth, that like farm, they hunt, they can their own food. And I was so fascinated by it. My mind was just like, whoa, this is insane. And, and I, it was just a really rich experience moving here and meeting all these people. And I just was like a sponge, because I had dropped out of school. It never really resonated with me well. And I don't think that's the right thing to do for most people. And I think for me, it would have been awesome to finish high school, but I ended up going back to night school and getting my GED. And so, I started a small painting business here originally, and then I'd work on farms. Like anytime I'd see a farmer cutting hay in a field, I'd like pull over and be like, hey, and like run over and be like, you want help? And they're like, I guess, get on a tractor. And I was like, all right, I don't know what you're saying, but I'll figure it out. And so like I started like learning like mechanical work. I started like, a lot of the farmers were really into church, so they had their kind of views with that. And,
So just by helping them, and that's, you learn those trades through them?
Yes.
Very cool.
Offering free help. And to be honest, I just like was like hungry for life, and I didn't have a family at that point. I didn't have a lot of responsibility. I was just like trudging the road of happy destiny, of like, I'll try this shit. I'll dig a big hole in my back. This guy stopped by and was like, there's 25 pounds of gold buried in your backyard. And like 2 days later, we were in a 20-foot deep hole. And I'm like, I don't think there's anything back here, but it was fun while it lasted, and like got to know him. And, another thing of like not judging people, this preacher dude, I was digging under my house to put a basement, which I do not ever recommend this. I hand dug underneath my whole house and put a basement in. But this preacher guy used to walk past my house every day and wave, hey, and I was like, and he came up one day and he's like, I really want you to come to church. And I was like, dude, I'm not coming to church. And he's like, well, I was like, I'll tell you what, if you dig with me for a week, I'll go to church. And he did. And I was like, shit. I was like, I did not think he would do that. No. And I was like, do I really have to go to church? And he's like, yeah. And God knows.
Yeah, for sure. I just dug a week with him. For sure you have to go.
So I did go. And, to be honest, it engaged me in the community in a different way than I have ever been. And I met so many people that I'm still really good friends with. And I don't go to church, but I'm still able to be in a friendship with these people. And it's really rich. And that's one thing I feel like I got is I want to have meaningful relationships in my life, which I feel really responsible for keeping up my end of the road. And that's one of the like really cool things about AA is, they have the 12 steps, and they're amazing. The first 3 steps are just awesome. Connecting with your higher power, trusting, third and, the 4th and 5th steps, pretty intense because, you're admitting all the faults in your life, which is just super crazy to kind of reflect on all this shit that you've done. And it's also kind of freeing because you kind of like just, blah, and you like tell somebody and you're like, holy crap. And they're like, that's not too bad. And you're like, what, man? Like, geez, okay, cool. It's great. It's not too bad. And like, you'd be surprised how many people have had it worse or just as bad as you, and then you just don't feel as important anymore, which in a way, that's what I needed to be able to kind of take the next steps I needed to.
Kind of grounding.
Yeah, super grounding. And I think some of the biggest steps, like, 8 and 9, making amends to people, is a big one. And, that doing that list of all the things you've done wrong, it's, to me, that's like one of the things that like keeps happening in my life, where I work in construction. I have a construction company, and I have to apologize a lot. Like, and when I do that with clients, they're like, "What? You're apologetic? You're the best builder ever." And I'm like, "Hey." And it's like super intense. I'm like, "All right, I'm gonna go apologize to this person." Like, and everybody's like, "You are?" I was like, "Yeah." And it's gonna feel really good afterwards,
Right.
And sometimes it does. It takes a little bit, but I have to say, like, applying that to just normal life, not just like getting through them and being done with the steps, because I know the steps are applied to a lot of situations in life. That they work really well. And, so I feel like that's a huge piece of my life nowadays, where it's just an important practice. The character defects, I skipped a few. 6 and 7 and shortcomings. I had a really hard time with that because I'm kind of like a yes man. And everybody's like, "Hey, will you do this?" And I'm like, "Of course I will." And then I'm like, all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, Saturday I have to work at 6 a.m. till like 4 o'clock in the morning the next day." I'm like, "What the shit?" And then I don't have a life because, like, healing and getting sober and like you do that so that you can actually have a life afterwards. So like, I feel like it's important for me. So like my character defects and shortcomings, it was like this rudimentary thing. I like had to stand in the mirror today and be like, "Matt, you're a strong person, capable of change. You can say no today." And like, I did that for like years. And I remember the slow progression of that, of like, where I would be talking to somebody and I'd be like, "Yeah, I could do that." And then like 3 hours later, I'd be like, "Oh man, I forgot my morning affirmation." And I said, "Yeah." And then I was like, "I'm calling them." And I'd be like, "I said yes, but I can't." And then like, a year later, I'd be like, "Yeah, no, I can't actually do that." And nowadays I'm able to like stop and be like, "Nah, I can't do that." Or "Yeah, I actually can do that."
Yeah. Or let me think
It's like,
about it. Yeah, it gives more room to
yeah.
not just go straight to the yes and then be overwhelmed from saying yes to everything versus saying yes to yourself, to something. Because when you say yes to someone else, you say no to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's funny because like I was literally, before we were talking, I have a partner in my business I was sitting on the porch with, and we're like, "Man, life's so hard. The COVID is all crazy here." And I was like, "I've become a yes man again. I just say yes to everything." And like, it's funny, like doing this
Including this
talk.
show.
Yeah. I was like, "I got this show. I don't even know what I'm doing." And it's so like and it's cool because like doing this, like it's showing me again how important it is to talk about this stuff, because it helps me remember like what I'm supposed to be doing, so that I can like do some stuff for myself. And and then, so one of the last steps, one's improving my spiritual connection to my higher power, which is like, honestly, is like a bigger struggle for me, because like it's always a moving target for me. I know there's like a power greater than me in the world, and I call it all sorts of things and it works for me. But the last one is really cool because it's like, helping others. And it's why I probably say yes too much, because when somebody's in need, I feel like taking a minute or 5 minutes or scheduling an hour to talk is so important and crucial to me staying sane. you know. And it's interesting because 99% of the time when I go into those situations, I'm like, I'm going to help this person. And I end up leaving being like, holy shit, I got a lot of work to do, you know? And like, it kind of like, I feel like I'm talking to myself, you
Mm.
know? And it's funny because I'll be talking to people because, you know, I've had people reach out and say, oh, I've been molested too. I've never told anybody and I want to talk about it, you know? And we'll be talking and I'll kind of laugh for a second. They're like, what the hell are you laughing at? And I'm like, I'm actually like thinking about how much like I'm actually getting out of this moment too, you know. And it's just that I'm happy, man, like that we can sit down and we can talk. And it's not about either one of us, it's about us together, like growing into
Mm.
better people, you know, and learning how to deal with this shit, you know, because it's not something we learn about in school. um you know,
Yeah, and
so
dealing with it, you have to talk about it and work through it, and versus the whole suppressing that you had done from since you were a kid.
yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, you know, and so fast forwarding, I worked here in my painting business and I had a partner then and they kind of went back out and drinking and alcoholism and stuff. And so we kind of did like this. And then the recession came and I moved back up to Connecticut and worked and got my electrical license working up there, which was a different experience for me because I put myself back into my old situation where there was like trigger central. I'd see things be like, oh, I remember like, like over there. And like, it's just like, whoa, man. And it was really cool because I was able to be around my family. I was able to go back to the place where I came from and be like, you can't take me out. You know,
Mm.
I'm growing up, I'm strong. You know, I got to like test my will a little bit. Not that I think that that's something I want to do all the time, but it's
Right.
nice to know that like I got this, you
Yeah,
know.
you have the power. It doesn't have power over you.
Yeah. And while I was up there, I got into a relationship. And this is the kind of thing that like it's good for me to know. It's like you kind of like get to this like really low point in your life and you build yourself up and you got all this stuff going on. You're like, yeah, this is good. I got a new vehicle and I can like buy something if I want it. And I don't have to lie today, but real
And
life still happens, you know, and like things come up and you're like, oh God. And you know, the only difference is like, and what I'm getting at is the only difference is now I have a tool bag and I can be like, all right, let me see what I need to fix this and make sure
yeah,
that I don't fuck up again. And
totally.
you know, because I met a woman in Connecticut that I had known prior to my life, and it's a tough situation. We had a good relationship, and it was fiery. It was like I don't even know. It's like actually like a bonfire, like so big that you can see it from the moon. But you know, we did love each other deeply, and we had a daughter together who's absolutely amazing. And after being married and together for 12 years, we decided to separate. And super hard. I don't think any separation is really easy, and some of them are. Some people like have a separation party and they're like, yeah, we're doing it. And you know, this one wasn't like that. And you know, I took a lot of work for me to be able to navigate through that. And I think the biggest thing that I learned from that, because you know, with social media, with TV, radio, friends, opinions. There's so much coming at you. It's really easy to not like listen to yourself.
Mm.
And and I forget that all the time. I will like research stuff and try, and that's what I would do with the divorce. And my gut told me that I needed to let my daughter move to California with my ex-wife. And everybody was like, you're fucking nuts. Like, I can't believe you would do that. Like, how are you going to let your daughter? Because my ex-wife was viewed as somewhat mentally unstable. And I let her go, and I went every month for 2 years to visit. And when I was told that I couldn't fly out there to see her, I drove. And what I did was I instilled a steady relationship with my daughter that was sturdy and it was strong. And whether I was there for 3 days a month or 10 days a month, she knew that she can count on that and she can count on me. And it would have been really easy for me in those 2 years to kind of slip back into old patterns, whatever they would be. But I made a commitment to myself and I trusted the process. And a year ago, she moved back to Virginia with me, and I have full custody of her. We're working through a lot of stuff. I believe in her just like Mac believed in me. And, we try and lead an honest and open life. And, as much as her mother kind of takes these dips and turns and stuff, and it's easy for me to be like, get out of our life, I still try to work that relationship out in a healthy boundary zone, because I want to keep things as open and honest and real as possible. And, so through all these things and all this stuff, I feel like, the biggest thing that I've learned about myself is that I am strong as hell. I felt weak as hell at a certain point in my life. And whether you're physically strong or emotionally, everybody has an inner strength. And I think if you find that, you can kind of open doors to whatever path that you need to go down. Everybody's very uniquely their own. And I think being honest, being responsible for your actions, I think that's the biggest things, having decent morals, and a vision for your life. To me nowadays, it's as simple as that, and then checking in. It's like, Sarah, you popped up and asked me to do this, and it helps me remember like the past 21 years or 39. Right. So.
And you get to see like how far you come.
Yeah. Yeah.
And two, like you talked about your like inner strength. When did you get that? At what point? Was it when you were in prison? Was it when, this man that you wrote to from a book came to visit you? At like what point did that inner strength, did you go, oh, there it is, I've got this?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that, because it comes in different waves. Like when I was in prison, I got an inner strength of defending myself, like physically, because I had to,
right, to survive.
And then I also was just strong mentally because I could never let my guard down. And then, when I got out, I kind of felt vulnerable again because I was always afraid that I would go back to prison. I honestly think, and this is total transparency, it's like kind of crazy that you asked that. I think that I found my real deep inner strength like 3 years ago, like my fortitude of life, which is essentially my healthy boundary. I started with a new counselor 4 years ago, and I went in there just completely feeling defeated. And I've been to so much counseling in my life. It's like online dating kind of sucks to a degree. Not for everyone, because I know a lot of success stories, but I also know a lot of people that have become super picky, and they're like, I didn't like the way he chewed. And I'm like, or I don't like the way that she flicks her hair. And I'm like,
that wasn't in her profile.
What the hell? I was like, just because you can click on a button and see another person, relationships are about compromise. Like you need to get to the next date and see what's up. And, so I think that I went to my counselor and I had this predetermined notion of like how I was going to work through it with my counselor, because I have been to tons of counselors and I know what a good counselor is and what a good one, what I want out of a counselor. So I was like trying to cherry pick like the right one. And so I finally picked one that works in childhood development type stuff, because I felt like a lot of my stuff's rooted in my childhood.
Yeah.
And she was a little bit like, what? And I was like, yeah. And then she totally got it. But the second I got in there, I felt like a tough person. I run a bigger construction company. I have around 40 employees. So I walk around and everybody's like, there's the boss. And I'm like, yeah. But in reality, I don't have healthy boundaries. And that was what we worked on. And I think when I sat in there and realized that I had to divorce my wife was when I really set a solid boundary in my life. And it felt like a really strong moment to me. And I think since then, it's incrementally been growing. And here recently, since I've gotten full custody of my daughter, I feel like I've taken control back of my life and I know where I'm going and I want to go. And yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, your story is incredible, by the way. And like, where are you right now? You said you have your own construction business, you have 40 employees. I mean, you dropped out of school freshman year, and now you have your own business with 40 employees.
Yeah. I think that, yeah. So 10 years ago, I started my construction company because of a threat from my ex-wife of not being worthy enough. And I almost did it out of spite. And yeah, I think I've grown the largest building company in our county in the past 10 years. And I feel like it's built on morals and honesty and being a genuine person, not trying, like I said, being, apologetic, that you'd be surprised how far that goes when you're in an intense situation, no matter what line of work it is, and you can own your own side of the street. Because a lot of times in workplaces with bosses and things like that, a boss may go home at night and be like, yep, I was wrong, but I'll never tell anybody I was wrong.
Totally.
And they may be doing that subconsciously, but for me, working the 12 steps, I make the extra step to make the hard call, to do the thing. And so I've grown a successful company that I manage with a bunch of people that I consider friends and family now. And it's awesome. I have a house with a bunch of land with people around me that I love. I've got my daughter. She's super beautiful. I'm dating, and that's interesting because I have some post-traumatic stress around those things, and it's been good. And I have a lot of meaningful relationships, and that to me is the most important. On the way over here, I called my redneck friend who's totally like different than me, but we meet at this one common level and we can talk on that wavelength, and I get so much from him. And it's really interesting because anywhere else in my life, I would look at that person and be like, poof, don't even come close, And so, yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Well, and like you were saying, like you still work through stuff. I think sometimes like we look at life like a movie, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the movie, they have, all their shit together. Life is great, and it ends. Where in real life, like it's just something that you continue to work through. Yeah. Like sometimes when we're like, oh, I made it. I'm here. I'm so great within myself. And then life is like, just kidding. Like, no, you didn't make it. Like, it's just a journey. Like, it really is never just a destination. You're continuing to learn about yourself and grow within yourself and just keep working through things and just keep leveling up. So I think sometimes we forget and think that, oh, I made it, but you really never make it. You keep going for it. So I think it's cool how you talk about how you're still working through things, because we all are. And, it's not a movie. It's real life.
No, it's about progress rather than perfection is what my friend says to me. And I'm like, good point.
So,
you know.
Totally. So I have my wrap-up question.
Okay.
So based on your hardships and your successes, how do you think like we can do better? Maybe do better as an individual within ourselves, do better in our society, do better in our community? What do you think as far as how can we do better?
I think, to be honest, is a whole is being more available for people. And, you know, when you have that tough moment, instead of being like, I'm going to find a new friend, you know, trying to do the hard work and say like, hey, that sucked. Like for me, like, can we talk about it? Or, you know, because you may realize you don't want to be friends with that person anymore. But the truth is, at least you did the work and you know, like, that's it, you know. And I think reaching out to people in need, like just trying not to close the door on so many different things, just becoming more open. And, you know, I think that's what I've learned, especially in the past 2 years with everything going on, you know, is like, if, you know, somebody feels a certain way, super strong politically, it don't have to initially just be like this. I don't have to buy into the bull crap if I don't want to, but I could also hear them out and meet them at a similar level and just connect. You know, I think we've lost a lot of connection. And so I think as a whole, I think that's really what I try and do and what works well for me.
Totally. I love that. And especially, you know, just during these times, yeah, we kind of, as a whole, have kind of gotten lost from those connections. And so, but, you know, people are hurting and people just want to be seen. Or, I saw this thing just recently where, and I love this, I've always wanted to do it and I'm going to do it one day, but I don't know. Sometimes I get stuck in the whole like reels and, you know, flipping on my phone on social media. But there was this one, and it's this man, and he blindfolds himself, and he's just like standing like on the street, like in New York or something. And he has this sign like where it says like, you know, you can hug me if, you know, you're having a hard day or you're going through something. And these people come up to him and he can't see them. He's not like, so they don't feel judged. They just go up to him and they just hug him. And he's like, hi, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm okay. You know, I just lost my aunt. And, you know, they kind of like talk for a second and they embrace. Like, I think you're totally spot on that we just have gotten so far from that and disconnected. So I love what you say about that. It's very cool.
It is. I think, you know, for me, I speculate a lot about what people are thinking about me or a situation that happened. And I realize half the time how wrong I am about those things until I just go up and say, hey, that sucked. Like, can we talk about it?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that did suck, but like, thanks for talking to me about it. You know, it's like, I just think it's just a small thing, you know, and it makes a big difference just on how I feel, you know, inside, and how I can go home and just go to sleep. You know, I'm not worried about that thing anymore that I made up in my head. So,
the story that you made up. So your story, incredible, love it. Some people might want to talk to you about it. Some people might have gone through some similar things as you have. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, my email is Matt, MATTSEBAS @gmail.com, Matt Sebas @gmail.com, or my Instagram is mountain_biscuit. mountain_biscuit.
Where did that come from?
Well, when I worked in Connecticut in the electrical field, everybody called me Seabiscuit for what reason, I don't even know. and then when I moved to Virginia, I was like, well, I guess now I'm a mountain biscuit because I'm in the mountains. So
that does make sense.
And that's how it is. Nothing much to it.
Mountain biscuit. Okay.
Mountain, not mound biscuit. Mountain.
No, I think my accent, it doesn't always come through, but sometimes it does.
You have a
Or
ring.
it's a speech impediment. I'm not sure which one.
Cool.
Love it. Well, thanks so much for coming on here. I seriously, even though we know each other and have known each other forever, there was a lot that I didn't know. So this was very cool for you to, tell us your story. And it's just amazing to see how people can go through so many difficult things and just rise above it and decide they want better for themselves and just go for it. And you very much did that. So it's pretty incredible. So thanks so much for being on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, you guys. Well,
Bye.
that was awesome. Much love, good vibes, and I will see you guys later. See ya.